Everybody, I'm going to talk through how to multiply any fruit bushes you've got in a really easy way of doing it. It's also pretty much free as well, and it's something you can be doing in what we call the dormant season, which means November through to March. So it's something you can do in the winter when the plants aren't growing, but we can take the cuttings we want. And these cuttings are called hardwood cuttings. And you'll see in front of me, I've got some stems of different fruit bushes, and you can see they're woody stems rather than being leafy green ones, and that's what we need. So the plants that you can take cuttings of for fruit bushes are currants, so red, black, white currants, or gooseberries. Other things like blueberries, unfortunately, you do in a different way. So maybe we'll be addressing that later in the year. You don't do those with hardwood cuttings. And you may have seen hardwood cuttings recommended for other shrubs, and certainly other ornamental shrubs. You can do the same things as well. But at the moment, we're going to talk about lovely fruit bushes, lovely currants. So what do we need to be able to take our cuttings? We need to have the bushes that we take the cuttings from, and I'll talk about what size. And what do we need to use to put them in? We need some multi-purpose compost, peat-free, in this bowl here, the brown. And then we need to put something in it which is going to allow for drainage. So I've got two examples here. Either I've got horticultural grit, which you can buy in any garden centre, or horticultural sharp sand. This isn't builder's sand, which is a bright orange colour and isn't useful. This is a kind of rough-sided sand with bits of grit in it as well, which you might be able to see there. And this will allow any moisture that's going to go where you've put your cuttings to drain through. So it's really important to have that, one or the other. You don't need both. I'm just showing you examples of it. So let's first of all have a look at our material, our plant material. I'm going to talk about currants first. And these stems that I've brought here, I've cut from a currant bush, a red currant bush, this last week. And I hope you can see the small buds that are there, which you can see slightly sticking out from the stem that I've got. Now, the sort of material I'm going to cut here is this year's growth, not old woody growth from years before, which may still be on the plant. How do you tell which is which? Well, the darker the stem, the older it is. So I hope you can see on this one that it gets lighter as it goes along, as it thins, and that's this year's growth. And then if you can see towards the end, it's a darker brown. So we might not necessarily use that. What size of growth do we need? Well, I think a pencil is a good thing to do an example by. So normally a cutting will be something like a pencil's depth, width, and about a pencil long. So somewhere between 6 inches and a foot, or 15 centimetres to 30 centimetres. The longer it is, the better it is. But sometimes it's difficult to get cuttings like that. So let's take one of these, which is a longer one that I got here. And the reason I've taken a long one is because we may be able to get more than one cutting from this stem that we've got. So we might as well use as much as we can, because it's a good idea, even though you might think, well, I've got one bush, I only need another one, so I'll just take one cutting. Don't do that. Take about 3, because they're not always successful. So if you lose one, you may still have 2, or if you lose 2, you may still have 1, or you may have all 3 might be successful if you're really lucky. So how do we cut these hardwood cuttings from the stems that we've taken from the plant? Well, what we're going to do is find a growth point, and you'll see, as I showed you before, these little buds that are sticking up. Each place where there's a bud will be also able to grow roots. So it has hormones in there. So what we're going to do is cut a straight cut just below. I'm going to find one here. There's one. I'm going to get rid of the very oldest growth and cut with my nice sharp secateurs a straight cut. Then I'm going to look along and see where can I find one that's about as long as I think I would like. And I'm going to cut now an angled cut. Why do I do that? Well, firstly, it's going to tell me which end is the bottom and which end is the top, because you don't want to put your cutting in upside down because it won't do. So you need to put your cutting into the soil in the right way so that it grows where it's growing upwards, it will grow upwards and you can see it. But the other reason why you do a slanted cut on the top is if it's out in the rain, because we're going to put these cuttings out into the garden situation, then any rain will just slide off. If you've got a straight cut, sometimes the rain can catch in that cut and that might lead to rotting off, which is what you don't want to happen. So straight cut at the bottom, angled cut at the top. Quite easy. So I've got one and that's quite a nice one. I'm going to put that, keep that one and have a look at some of the other. Now, I've got a bit left. Let's have a look and see whether this can be used. Well, you want, when it says hardwood cutting, it means hardwood. So if you find the top of your cutting that you've taken is a little bit bendy, probably means the wood is a little bit soft and it's not going to survive. So I'm going to put that top bit away and not use that. And I'm going to take another one and have a look and see, okay, that looks nice. It looks about the right width. I'm going to do straight at the bottom and angled at the top. So I've got another nice one. So I'm going to put that there. Yeah, not sure about that one. Might work actually. Let's see. So I've got to do straight at the bottom, but it's going to make it quite short. Doesn't mean it won't survive. Straight at the bottom, angled at the top. Let's see. Put that with it as well. So that's my currants. And of course, I could do many more if I wanted because I've got more material. But for now, that will do. That's easy. What else can I do? Gooseberries. Now, this is where you need to put your gloves on, because gooseberries have thorns. So you really don't want to get scratched from the thorns or let them go into your skin. You don't need to get rid of the thorns that you're on your stem that you cut. But what I do want to get rid of, and you can see here, is that they've still got leaves on the cutting. And the leaves may rot if we leave them on. So we're going to make sure that we take off any leaves that are still left. You can just pull them off, won't do them any harm. And then it makes it a nice clean cutting. So we don't have anything that's likely to rot off in the ground. So I'm going to leave on any buds or any, there's thorns. I can feel them. You may not be able to see them, but they're here underneath. So what am I looking for? I'm looking to do a straight cut at the bottom. And then I'm going to look, how long is that? I think that one just above a bud. An angled cut. That's too small, so I'm not going to use that bit that's left. Throw that bit away along with the leaves. And then I'm going to do another one. I'm going to take off the leaves. There we are. So some people in your group might not like dealing with gooseberries with thorns on, so they can do the, they can work with the currants which don't have thorns, and people who are tougher with a pair of gloves can. So I'm going to do straight at the bottom, angle at the top. Maybe I'll do that. No, that's a bit thin. Angled at the top. Right, so I know when I look at them, I can see which way they should be up. So that'll do for now. What am I going to put them in? Well, if you haven't got a growing space in the garden, but you've got somewhere you want to put it, you can mix up some soil and put them, or a mixture, and put them into a pot. So I'm going to mix up my mixture. So I want, as I said, half and half multi-purpose compost without peat in it, because we're protecting peat bogs. If you have your own homemade compost, you could possibly use that. If it's good, well-rotted compost, that would be good to use as well. So what I've done is I've put them in jars. How do you weigh out half and half? Well, just use some containers that have the right size together. So there's two. So I've got half multi-purpose compost, half I'm going to use some horticultural sand, gritty sand in there. And then I'm sure somebody would love to have a good go mixing it up. So again, pair of gloves, rub it through, make sure you haven't got any lumps of anything. Sometimes the compost can get a bit wet if it's been sitting outside in the winter weather, which this has. Also, what I found, well, the compost has got a bit of old wood, so let's get rid of that. So I'm going to mix it all up. There we go. That's nicely mixed. And that will do for putting our cuttings in. Now, I've got a pot here, which I prepared earlier. So I've got a pot here, and if you look at the pot, you'll see it's a really deep pot. Because what we want is to sink these cuttings 2/3 of the length of the cuttings. Okay, so you can see I've already got some in there, and what's happened with those ones is that they've been placed around the edge of the pot, because that helps them drain. Sometimes if they go in the middle, if it's holding on to moisture too much, they may rot. So if you can get a big pot like this is probably a rose pot. They often come in big, long pots. So a plastic one's fine. You don't need to have anything fancy. So a nice deep pot. So what I'm going to do is to sink my cuttings that I made in, and I'm going to try and do them, as I said, about 2/3. So you can hold it where you think 2/3 is and sink it in. Just leave a little gap between the ones you've already got in there. Sink it right in. If it's not going in easily, you can use a pencil or a dibber to make a hole. So that's in, because what's going to happen at every point where there's a bud or a growth point, roots will eventually grow. So what you're going to have is, from your cuttings, several places where roots will grow. So that's why you need to sink it in. So there's quite a lot of points which can have possible roots growing from it. So I'm going to put another one in. Now, what I also want to do is to have a label on it to remind me of what I've got in this pot, because I might be a couple of months might go by and I think, what on earth did I put on that pot? So you can put red currant, and just put the date when you did it. And as I said, these can be done from really November through to March, possibly not on a freezing cold day. Maybe better to do it when it's above freezing. So what am I going to do with my pot now that I've got everything in it? Now you could do two different, doesn't matter if, say, you added gooseberries to this pot, just label where you've got the appropriate plants. So you could have red currants on one side, gooseberry cuttings on another, doesn't matter. Or you might have red currants, black currants, white currants, that's fine. Just label them so you remember, because even when they eventually grow leaves, you're not going to remember which are which, because they've all got the same leaves. So here we are with our pot. We've labelled it. Where is it going to go? It has to go outside. It'll go outside because it's going to stay there for quite a long time. What's going to happen is, during the winter, it's not going to grow roots, but it will, what we call, callus over. It'll make cells that are ready to grow into roots once the spring comes and the temperature goes up. So what we want to do is to keep this somewhere where it's going to stay reasonably moist. You don't need to water it unless you have a particularly dry winter, which is unlikely. What you might want to do is to just give it a quick water as you put it out, just to make sure that any of the compost is settled around the cuttings and there's no air holes in it. So I would suggest that you place this, say, on a north-facing area of the garden. In other words, not where sun's going to shine directly on it. If you're in a particularly cold part of the north and you're likely to have snow and frost regularly, if you've got somewhere like an unheated glass house, greenhouse, or you've got a polytunnel where it can be just kept from the worst of the freezing, and it's pretty much frost-free, where you would put things anyway that you're going to grow, that's a good idea. But if it's in that sort of environment, in a glass house or a polytunnel, just make sure it doesn't dry out, because if this dries out, the roots are going to just dry out as well and it won't be successful. So it needs to be kept reasonably moist, but not too much. So you are not going to see a new plant until the autumn of the year coming. It has to be in here for a year. So it's not a quick way of taking cuttings, but it's a very easy way of taking cuttings. So perhaps over the winter, you won't really need to give it any care. But once the spring, summer comes and it gets dry, and perhaps we had a very dry summer this year, you may need to check it and make sure it's still moist, still reasonably moist, and it doesn't dry out, and it's in a shady spot. So what you will see as the year progresses is you'll begin to see leaves growing on it, and you'll know that it's been successful. But we don't suggest that you take it out of this until autumn time next year, because actually the winter is a great time to plant fruit bushes anyway. So you tend to do it when they're dormant. And then once they've flowered, you knock it out on its side, and you look and you can see the roots have grown. And then you can plant it out in a spot that you want, or in a pot that you want, with multi-purpose, or perhaps something with what's called Johninus, a sort of slightly heavier weight of soil in there. I was trying to think of things that I haven't told you, but I think basically that's pretty much it. So it's cut your cuttings now in the dormant season, put it into a pot with half and half, either grit or horticultural sand and multi-purpose compost or compost. Flat cut at the bottom, angled cut at the top. Water it in outside, make sure it's labelled so you remember what you've got. And then just put it somewhere that's north-facing or somewhere shaded and sheltered or protected in a polytunnel. And then just make sure it goes through the summer and doesn't dry out. And then hopefully you should have some nice, free, new fruit bushes next year. So that's what you do. And if you're keen on doing that with other sorts of shrubs, you can certainly do it with roses, buddleias, lots of plants that have woody stems can be done in exactly the same way. So good luck with that. Hope it works for you. I'm sure it will.